Welcome to Violin Adventures number 261. We start off finishing an old repair, and then we work on cutting the sound holes and fitting a bass bar, and then we start on another repair. So hope you enjoy with all the extras. Okay, here we are. Got nice hot glue. I have the neck ready, refitting it to this extra block we added. And we'll get this violin back to singing again. Back to our new violin. Well, it's time to say goodbye to our Appalachian mountain. Let's just check the dimensions. So we're about 7 inches tall and a little over 24 inches wide. But we need to make room for the next steps in the violin. So I'm going to say goodbye to all these wood chips. They represent hours and hours of carving. Well, yesterday I was working on these cuts and I had brought the camera up close so that you could see it going from really rough cuts to a little nicer cut. Well, when I stopped to take a break, I realized the camera wasn't on. So and I can't go backwards. So here's where we are now. You can see that it's still a bit rough and the holes are all too small. So we'll continue on here and see if we can get some more footage. And you can see I keep changing my blade to keep it sharp so I can make really good, nice cuts. Well, you know, this is interesting right here, is making this cut to free up the wing there. Okay, there it's open, but I want to put more of a swing into this wing. I'm going to come up here. Just make it look more graceful. Now, this needs to be opened up. There they are. They're finished for now, and then over the next few days, I'll probably be making little adjustments. But now we need to go on to the bass bar. Here's a new repair of an old violin from the late 1800s. Okay, we have here a very nice looking violin. And the bottom down here it got damp and the block is loose. The ribs are all bent here. But you can see on the back, got a nice design. It's very beautiful. Can you see here? This nice carving, and then on the back here But what we're going to do now is I'm going to get this top off. Because the top here has a crack, we need to cleat that, and then we need to get that block and get it in place. Here's the inside of this violin. It's very neatly done. You can see here where the sound post really dug in. So we're going to check that thickness out. But you can see where the chalk, where they were fitting the bass bar. And it's all chalked. Is the label. And he's probably the one that chalked this and did that nice work. Now here's our block, which is loose. So we'll see about getting that back in. We've got seam here is open, and also the seam over here on the seam here on the top. So, and then over here we'll get the block in, and then we'll work on these ribs. Okay, I've made some fresh new hide glue here so that we'll have a strong connection. And the first thing I'm going to do on this repair is close the back and the top seams. Okay, the old block in here, normally they will split right in the middle, but this one is actually split on the side and goes in quite a ways, which is the first time I've seen a split like that. But with all the pressure that it holds, I'm not going to glue this, I'm going to replace it. Okay, so we've got a new piece of wood here, and I'm going to fit that in here. Okay, here's the plan. We have on this end, the ribs are so bent out of shape that they don't want to go back in, and they don't fit right. So I'm going to take the old block and use that as a form, and then I have a counter block, and I'm just going to wet the ribs and work with the ribs probably for a couple days to get them to go back to their original shape. So I'm going to heat up these ribs with really hot water, but I also want to protect the seam that we just closed. All right, we'll just let this sit for a while and think about moving back to the original shape. Time for a story. Okay, we're gonna finish up our little booklet written in the late 1800s. We just have one page left. So we were talking about France. It says, in the early records of violin making in France, like those of other countries, seemed buried in obscurity. Its literature Its literature offers but scant information of a reliable character, and we are therefore compelled to make the most of such evidence as is afforded by the slender testimony of paintings and ecclesiastical monuments. We are told that Baltazzarini was the first to introduce the violin, or rather the performance of it, into France in the year 1577, so that it is safe to assume no maker of any note existed anterior to this period. One authority tells us that in the year 1566, the name of Tywersus of Nancy appears as the lute and violin maker, and is reported to have assisted Andreas Amati to finish certain instruments made for the chapel of Charles IX. Soon after this period, several names of makers were recorded, but little is known of them. Excellence in violin making seems to have commenced with the middle of the 18th century, when the name of Nicolas Lupeau appears on the scene as the founder of the French school. Before he died, however, in 1824, France had given birth to Jean-Baptiste Violin. He was probably the best of the French makers. I added that, in whose hands the construction of violins attained the utmost perfection. Now we're moving on to Germany, and we've just got 3/4 of a page. Let us now direct our spirit of inquiry into Germany, that land of music and musicians. This country, notwithstanding its present musical position, appears to have been somewhat behind the times in regard to the production of any early violin performers of note, and affords the names of fewer musicians than almost any other country during the 16th century, if we except Spain. An explanation of this seems to be afforded by the fact of the wars which devastated Germany during the latter part of the 16th and the beginning of the 17th centuries, and particularly the terrible 30 Years' War, during which 5 great armies overran that unhappy country, carrying desolation and havoc in every part of it. These wars destroyed the arts, which can only flourish in the bosom of peace and happiness. It is certain that at this period the school of Germany was greatly inferior to that of Italy. It even appears that the French school began before the German to emerge from obscurity. Reason is wanting to account for the German lack of early performers, but we feel constrained to borrow the following words from Dubourg. He says, quote, "We may observe that although derived originally, like all others, from that of Italy, and contracting no inconsiderable obligations to it in its progress, it has been on the whole much less indebted to the Italians for resources and support than the school either of France or England." End of quote. Although the early German performers were inferior as soloists to those of Italy or France, they were certainly able to hold their own as orchestral players. Be this as it may, they have certainly in modern times produced some of the finest violinists the world has seen. The music, too, has long since supplanted that of Italy. Thomas Baltzer, born about 1630, was esteemed the finest violin performer of his time, but he came to England, as we have seen, in 1658, and helped to rescue the violin from the low estimation in which it was held then, an honor, however, he lived only 5 years to enjoy. It was not until the early part of the 18th century that any attempts were made to establish a German violin school. Amongst the first to diffuse any artistic influence may be mentioned Francis Benda, 1709 to 86, and John Stamitz, 1719 to 61. But the honor of founding a distinct school must be awarded to Leopold Mozart, the father of the great W.A. Mozart, and after him came William Kramer, who ultimately came to England. These were followed by J. Solomon and Kiesewetter. Louis Spohr, born in 1784, may rightly be termed the founder of the modern German school. He was both a performer and composer of the highest order. And that concludes our book. So next time we're going to have to find a new book or find some new stories. The Hebrew Minute. Ki ani Hashem Elohecha mahazik yimenika haomer laka al tira ani azartika. For I am the Lord your God, who holds, but this also could mean who gives strength, to your right hand, saying to you, fear not, I will help you. If you know where this is found, please leave it in the comments below. Well, this is Friday afternoon. It is sunny and beautiful, but it is cold. Let's go in and see what's going on. Here we are in the shop with lots going on. Our violin has got the bass bar in now. So it looks like we've got to finish the scroll and we've got to get this closed up so we can start on the purfling. Over here is just a little display. And here's the violin we're working on. I'm letting these blocks just reshape the rib here. And we'll let that reshape over the weekend before we glue it all together. And over here is a bow that needs to be rehaired. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your wonderful comments. Thank you to the new subscribers. Thank you for your thumbs up. And until next time.